Path of Fire Day 4 has just come and gone, as I have throughout the rest of the week. I wanted to give you guys some impressions and discussion about the gameplay I've been experiencing and my adventures through the new regions. Now, yesterday we talked about a few things that spurred quite a lot of discussion. First, on the merits of rushing through and why people did it. All kinds of opinions on that, ranging from max efficiency from playtime to not wanting to be spoiled on the story. But most of the discussion came on the merits of running big meta events in expansions. And it's funny because I've read a lot online, oh, there's a big split in whether people like metas or not. There really is. There genuinely is a lot going around, and it's not necessarily negative, mean-spirited, cruel discussion. It's just genuine chat about whether the expansion would be better or worse having a lot of metas. And so someone has astutely noted how the term meta has kind of shifted its meaning a lot in Guild Wars 2 right now, and we have to be clear about what we mean when we say this, right? A meta event, okay, is literally just a selection of dynamic events chained together and narratively bound to one another, and you get a bit of UI in the top right hand corner that tells you how they progress. That's technically what a meta event is, and in those terms, Path of Fire has loads of them. I showed off a really good one in the Elon Riverlands at Augury Rock on just yesterday's video. But now, since Heart of Thorns, it's kind of shifted its meaning to two other things, really. That is, that a meta event is something that is a major thing that has to have a big boss at the end and unites an entire map of players to come together and fight it. And to a slightly lesser extent as well, I think when people say Path of Fire has no metas, what they actually mean is there's no farm potential behind the meta events. Like, why do people really like Auric Basin in Tyria? Yes, it's incredibly well built and it's beautiful, and seeing four massive packets of players zerging from the north, west, south, and east as you finally break the 4 Octovines is very thrilling, and running around getting all the chests and stuff, and it's all, got good voice acting, and the music rises and crescendos and does all these wonderful things. Yes, it's a well-built meta event, but why do people play it really? Why did they do it so much over 2 years? Well, because it was attached to a farm. So I think when people say, oh, Path of Fire has no metas, what they mean is there's no metas that lead us to a farm, and therefore also no metas that entire maps will unite probably to go for. Like, this was all bound together in Heart of Thorns, and we need to sort of pick it apart a bit more when we look at Path of Fire, which goes to a more vanilla approach. So in addition to my opinions yesterday, a couple of things I will add about how I feel about this whole topic, because I don't really know which is the best way to lean, but I feel most people haven't identified that when they say they don't like the meta events in Heart of Thorns, what they're probably saying is they didn't like the timers in Heart of Thorns and how they felt railroaded into specific maps at specific times, and Join Wars 2 that comes along with that. And I'm certainly in that camp too. I cannot stand being a few minutes late to prep for a Geralt and then having to click join on and never know whether I'm going to do it. It's one of my most infuriating, aggravating experiences I can have in this game. And I think that that's the stuff that people say they really didn't like. I've heard other people saying, oh, there are toxic opinions and things that come out with metas. I don't know whether that's really true. I think that that comes out when the devs ask more of the player base in open world events, in that you shouldn't burn this character at this point, or you shouldn't break this break bar at this point, or we need to kill everything in unison. Those kind of things I really enjoy. But in the open world, where you get kind of noobs running around that aren't paying attention and don't look at chat, they can ruin events for everyone else and create this animosity between people. I think that might have caused more toxicity within Heart of Thorns than anything else. And that, of course, has nothing to do with meta events. That could happen on any random dynamic event out there. As long as enough people are incentivized to do it, that toxicity can brood. But I also think another thing that's happening in this discussion is a lot of people are declaring that they hate metas or love metas, but it all seems so founded on launch Heart of Thorns stuff, which is so irrelevant. The Heart of Thorns 2.0 patch came out about 6 months later and dramatically changed the way that this stuff has played and felt, and it's kind of like, I can feel it, that there's a lot of people who zerged to the game when Heart of Thorns came out, played for maybe a month or two and then quit, and now they're back for Path of Fire, and they're joining in these discussions, and they really don't actually know how metas have functioned in Guild Wars 2 for a long time. They haven't gone for many of the collections. They haven't actually squeezed that much playtime out of Heart of Thorns, and I just ask people to be wary of when you think of a Heart of Thorns meta, whether you're pro or against them, it doesn't matter what side of the line you're on. Just try and actually think about what they are in game today, because launch Heart of Thorns doesn't really matter. One final thing I will add as well is that there's an argument going around, and I understand it very much. There's an argument that says Path of Fire doesn't have any metas, and it's actually very good. It's good that it doesn't have meta. There's been a lot of people saying that it's good. And one of the reasons they justify this is because they say, well, Heart of Thorns has got lots. So by Path of Fire not having lots of these farmable metas, it means that both can coexist. Heart of Thorns maps won't be dead. People will keep doing Auric Basin and stuff because Path of Fire hasn't added anything to replace it. We have a balance. It's important that the two are different. And I understand that argument, but that's not a balance at all, really, if in 5 months, everyone has all of Path of Fire declared as done. And because there are no renewable content in open world formats like that, all the maps become mostly empty. That's really not a balance at that point. That's just everyone at Heart of Thorns. So right now it feels like that, but I don't know whether that argument stands. Maybe you can argue, well, that's okay if the Path of Fire maps end up feeling a bit more dead. It is an MMO, but none of the content requires massive groups, so small parties can always feel welcome there. I get that too. But I also don't think the argument works long term. Like, what about next expansion pack? Then the one after, then the one after. You can't maintain this. One expansion has lots, the other doesn't. I think that the answer really is what I said yesterday, which is that we need a variety and a balance.
Reinforcements incoming!
So yeah, speaking of populations, let's get into my experience a little bit. I noticed something a bit to do with populations in Path of Fire. When I press M and I look at my world map with all the yellow dots everywhere representing my guildies, I can see that there are tons of people playing. If you look at LFG, there are an enormous amount of people playing. I genuinely don't know if I've seen this many people playing Guild Wars 2 since HOT, but it even feels like more than that. Now, that's obviously super anecdotal. We don't know how the population compares to 2 years ago to now, but it really does seem like there's a lot of people there. That said, on day one, I mentioned there haven't been any mega server issues. I actually wonder if I have been hitting mega server issues, because more recently, the maps themselves, despite knowing lots of people are there, it feels like I'm getting put into shards that have been spun up that very few people have in them, and it's a bit unfortunate. Like, I'm playing the game with someone else, and when we both log in their version of the map, there'll be like 8 or 9 people stood around every waypoint and all sorts going on in map chat and party chat. And my version of the instance nearly has like no one around any waypoints. And there is stuff going on in map chat, but it's less so. And that's a bit disappointing. I would hate to think that that's been a little bit weirdly skewed. And again, it's not that the maps have been empty. I'm just pointing this out because I wonder whether what I said on day one isn't exactly true. And I wonder whether the mega servers could genuinely be doing a bit better. Anyway, so let's talk about what I played. Now, yesterday I mentioned I'd explored a lot of the Elon Riverlands. That's the third map. It took me 3 days to get there. That was a lie. I hadn't explored a lot of the Elon Riverlands. I'd felt like I'd explored a lot of it because I'd unfogged areas, and I should know better than this by now. I really hadn't. So today on day 4, I went for full map completion there. I did manage to get it, and it made me realize just how much more there was that I hadn't seen. Some amazing highlights down in the bottom right of the map where the actual Elon River now is, and you've got these wetlands. There are these incredible looking waterfalls. I'm going to try to ignore the lore and the reason how this waterfall actually has ended up existing and where that water is potentially flowing from. But it's so cool. Look at this. It rivals the waterfall that we saw in the second map earlier. Behind it, there are actually all these little caves you can walk into with various chests and flesh reavers and things to fight. In fact, one thing I will say is all these little cubby holes with these small chests. I feel like the chests don't give me quite enough to really make me feel rewarded for having found them. I think what the game needed was an achievement for finding all of them, because it makes me sad to realize most people won't come in behind this waterfall. Another area of this map is there's this like huge cave complex system. Now, because the Path of Fire maps are so large, the cave can seem like a little blip when you look at the world map. But this is actually quite a big cave system here with all these Corsairs in there now. It's essentially Path of Fire's version of bandits, but we're dealing with Corsairs, which is great as we move further south into Elon regions. And there's this worm bait mechanic that you can throw around to splash gloop on people, and the worms will attack them, and they'll throw that on you. I never quite understood all of it. It was nice to explore a small cave like this and have mounts available, but feel, yeah, I don't want to get on a mount in this small confined area and get to wander around and do some like vague JP stuff. But again, usually your reward for going to these cool places are those chests. and I just feel like the loot within the chests themselves isn't enough for me right now. Maybe that's the solution, actually, the loot that you get inside. That's been a recurring problem always with Guild Wars 2, that they just feel always slightly less than what they could be, and I guess maybe that's an anti-botting mechanic or consideration they've got there. I'm not entirely sure. So more stuff about the Riverlands. I mentioned yesterday that, or I think I mentioned yesterday, that though I'd got the skimmer, and there was lots of like wide open spaces to ride it around on, the actual areas that you can use the skimmer, that you have to use it because you're traveling over quicksand or you're traveling over branded, damaged areas or whatever. I mentioned that maybe there'd been a little bit less of that. I was wrong about that. The Elon Riverlands has some massive, large chunks of the map that are just quicksand. And again, you get to glide across. Sometimes this is for mastery points or POIs and stuff like that. That was something that really struck me here. I also did, and you should have already seen the footage of this by now on the video, I did a long tour of the map with no user interface, riding the skimmer, gliding from the very south to the very north. One thing I'm really curious about, and probably won't go to the effort of doing myself, but I want to see someone do a video of riding the Raptor from the very north of the expansion all the way to the south of the final map, and then also taking that exact same route but doing it on foot, and just putting them side by side so that people could see just like the actual on-foot time it takes to explore through here. Maybe do a walking version. That would be great. It would be so many hours to get the whole way through the damn place. But yeah, I had this pretty interesting experience in there. There was a heart I still hadn't done at this point, where you get to dig in these supply piles and these rats scatter. You kill the rats, grab the supplies, put them back into the pile. All the hearts have felt very interesting. Finally, I found myself getting a bit dodgy with trade contracts, and there have been some minis I haven't been able to purchase anymore because I haven't been doing enough events between my map exploration to get them all. And also buying new mounts and things does take some trade contracts, and I actually didn't have enough for the skimmer initially. I had to go in my inventory and pop some consumables. But yeah, what a great map. One of the things that I was really interested in going to, outside of Augury Rock and outside of going to the Throne of Palentia, I wanted to see the Lonely Statue Vigil. So there are a lot of iconic big things in the Crystal Desert. One of them was this. There were such a thing in Guild Wars 1 known as attribute point quests. And these were the equivalent, and you'll have to excuse the crude comparison here, but these were the equivalent of specific quests you could complete in Guild Wars 2 that would give you ultra grand master traits, okay? There's not a great comparison, but it's a pretty good comparison. They kind of extended the power level of your character, right? They gave you more attribute points in that game than you'd otherwise have. Kind of like how in Guild Wars 2, you can imagine maybe getting extra trait points if we were still on a system like that. So there were these very important quests known as attribute point quests, and in development, the devs were trying to make one in the Crystal Desert. And this attribute point quest in development was supposed to be that there'd be this big statue called the Lonely Vigil statue. It was of this great female warrior with her arm outcast, and you would walk over to it, place an ancient secret explosive weapon at its base, you would blow it up and you would watch it fall down in real time, and it would form a bridge allowing you to travel to another area where you'd get your attribute points or the quest would complete. So this was something they were trying to work on in development, and they built a version of the statue stood up and a version of the statue that had tumbled over. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, time constraints, engine constraints, they never managed to finish it, and that quest kind of got deleted. But so what they did instead was, as an homage to this lost developed quest, in the desert, in the actual release of Guild Wars 1, if you looked on the horizon far away, you would see the statue, like a mirage, standing there, way out in the distance. And if you chose to explore and wander all the way over to it for ages and ages to walk towards this place, when you finally got there, you'd realize that it had been an illusion, and it had actually not existed at all, and it was fallen over. So it was this kind of magical thing where if you looked at it from far away, it felt like it was still there, and then when you got close, it had fallen over. It was a really fun thing. It was something that they even allowed us to see from a distance many years, well, not many years, but years later when we got to Nightfall, and you could look across the Crystal Desert from many miles away, and you'd see the Lonely Vigil standing out there waiting for you, deceiving you, because if you went close to it, it would fall down. Now, so Guild Wars 2, Crystal Desert, we have mesmers, illusions, and phantasms and stuff have actually taken quite a prominent role in the story quite frequently. I was wondering if they were going to do anything with this and how cool it would be. So you can go there in the Elon Riverlands. I don't know whether there's a dynamic event that relates to the place, but for Guild Wars 2's purposes, it is just a fallen over statue now. That thing looking at from the distance isn't there. Now, it is still a beautiful place, and it's weird because it's all lush and verdant here now. This was like raw, horrible desert in GW1, and now we're looking at you know, it's a part of the Riverlands properly, and it's all, you know, there's lush foliage clinging to the statue and stuff. So it feels like, in many ways, much like any other ruin, it's a point of interest. I hope that there's a dynamic event there. I hope that they explain something more with that, or maybe just dive into it a bit more, but it is there in the map, and that was something quite fun that I was looking forward to getting to, and I ultimately did. So my exploration of the Riverlands ended. Well, it didn't quite end, but one of the final things I did was in the very south.
Okay, we're through the outer wall. Now to the prison keep. Amara, we're coming. Boromir, there's cannons. Take them all out!
So at the very south, there's this great wall. We'd heard in lore that Palawa Joku had dammed the Elon River, diverting its flow, and this had caused the stuff in the Crystal Desert. That idea of the dam, I don't know whether we really see in Guild Wars 2, actually, now that Path of Fire's out, but there is an idea of a great wall. A wall at the north of King Joko's kingdom, and people who rebel from him are exiled up here to where we are in the game right now, in the Elon Riverlands, and in exile, people can never return. And this great wall is what separates it. I don't know why, but even though this isn't a dam, I love it. I think I just love walls in fantasy settings. But so we get to travel to this, and you get a little bit of a taste of the more southern regions here, like the Desolation, straight away. You get a taste of, like, King Joko's Bone Palace, and a lot more of his architecture, and a lot more awakened influence. There are new monsters starting to arrive, by the way. I haven't mentioned this for a few days now, but more monsters have been slowly seeping in, more ranks arriving among the awakened. There's kind of a version of the Mordrum Vinetooth rig that they're using, but it's this giant awakened mummy, and there's some fun events on that coming up. But yeah, look at these places. They're fantastic. And so there's an event here where you travel alongside like a sun spear. You go into what's called the Bone House, where there's a nearby village of exiles who are being oppressed. And they mention this place. You can end up visiting there via a dynamic event, and you get locked inside in quite a challenging boss fight. So I don't know whether it's just because I'm playing on a really bad Weaver build, and I am, and I'm playing Weaver badly, and I'm not having too much fun on Weaver right now. But this was a real struggle. There were like 3 of us, like a random guildie was running around. We did just about manage to beat the event, but they have these fantastic new abilities where they swirl you into these vortexes, a bit like some of the Mordrum did 2 years ago. But this one like holds you in place. You could try and dodge out, but if you stay in, then you get hit by this big nuke explosion. I think actually I had to pop a revive orb to beat this in the end. But there are these prisons and optional mechanics. So you guys might remember some very rare events in Guild Wars 2 in 2012 allowed us to have bonus objectives during dynamic events where you'd go press F on something or break something. That happens in Path of Fire a lot more too. Bonus objectives. I wanted to see this for a long time. Path of Fire has been delivering on it. So as you infiltrate this place, you can free people from their cages. You can destroy extra fortifications. I don't know whether that really affects the outcome of the meta in any way or helps you to kill the boss in the end. But generally, really fun stuff. Now, there's still a big section of the Elon Riverlands I haven't visited, and that's because I don't have the teleports available from the final mount, the Jackal. And that's been happening very frequently. There are like these weird floating islands and places in the second map as well that people were telling me about. Apparently, I still haven't gone to. So there's mastery points and definitely still stuff to do here. But these were some of my later experiences and really got me ready for exploring the Desolation.
The citizens of the Bone Strand are experiencing a rise in suspicious activity lately. Can you help?
And so that's where I headed next. Now, I am a bit disappointed in the core story today. The core story I experienced on day 4 took place throughout the Desolation map, which I have now visited. And it didn't really have much going on in terms of like actual instances. So there's a lot you do and you speak to a lot of NPCs and it's very open worldy, but it feels like it did drop off. It feels to me like what the core story really needed was a proper instance right here at the Bone Wall. I wanted an instance involving like scaling it or breaking through it or whatever. But just to, you know, really dive into how we managed to get south of the wall beyond these exiles. And that really doesn't exist. There's just a portal and we walk through. And despite all of the world building and map story and stuff you get everywhere else talking about this being this serious fortification that people shouldn't be able to travel through, we just kind of meander our way through. And I don't know, was that a cut instance that maybe they wanted to do? That's the first little disappointment I've really had with the story. And in fact, so here's some news for you guys. On day 4, I didn't just finish the Elon Riverlands. I didn't just go to the Desolation. And we're talking about another 6 to 7 hours of gameplay. I didn't just do that, but I actually went all the way to the 5th map as well. Now, the reason I went to the fact I went to the 5th map doesn't really mean anything about the size of the 4th. The Desolation map is enormous, and I've barely scratched it. However, the story, which I had been following at the time, kind of takes you on a very quick beeline straight through it. And looking at the achievements and the way that it works, it feels like the Desolation got a bit gypped for story. It feels like there wasn't a good instance entering it. It feels like there weren't enough things to do with like instant story. And I know that we should appreciate open world story as much as we do instant story, and certainly I do. But I think there's a quality to having some real time in an instance hanging around these places and getting to slow down. And as far as I can tell, there's like one instance in the Desolation. It's not a particularly big one. It's a good one, but it's not a particularly big one. And then immediately the story is like taking you further to Vabi, the final map. So I have spent about 5 seconds in Vabi. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. And I turned around, and now I'm sort of just in the Desolation, playing purely for map exploration purposes. And that's the first time I've really experienced this in Path of Fire as well. It would frequently happen in Core Guild Wars 2 and Heart of Thorns that the only reason I'm playing is for the purpose of map completing and very little else. That's finally happened to me here in Path of Fire. It took a long time to happen, but it has. And that's because the story really was very thin, I think, on this map. Also because I've basically finished Weaver now. So if people want to know, if you go into Path of Fire with no hero points, and you seek to finish your elite specialization, and you get full exploration everywhere, you will finish it just about the first third of your exploration into the 4th map, the Desolation. You'll get it about there. So I think I need the final skill in the elite, which I'll acquire throughout the Desolation. I actually think that's a perfect balance. That's really good. But so now my incentive for doing that has dropped off. The story was a little... So basically, I'm just running around to explore this place for the thrill of exploring this place now. And so we'll see how that feels tomorrow. I'm guessing I'm getting pretty close to the end of the story now. So something that really happened that was very interesting to me as a Guild Wars 1 player here occurred now. And that is that what I just did as I traveled south of the Elon Riverlands, I went beyond the Bone Wall, and I came into the Desolation, and got to the Mouth of Torment and stuff. Oh my god, the Mouth of Torment. We'll talk about that in a second. What I just did was I actually crossed the boundaries of campaigns in Guild Wars 1, and this has been a really profound experience that I'm sure not many of you listening to this video will understand, but let me try and give you the mindset, okay? Guild Wars 1. We have prophecies. We get to go to the Crystal Desert. This is a game where, when you look at the world map, there are many areas that are unexplorable. You can only go to little chunks, and that's it. Very much like Guild Wars 2 is, but to a more extreme extent. So we get to go to these Crystal Desert areas, but we never get to go properly south of the Crystal Desert. We never even get to see what is properly south of the Crystal Desert. Later, Guild Wars 1, Nightfall comes out. We're in a whole new continent. We are told by the lore that north of this continent is the Crystal Desert. And if we explore in the very northern reaches of the Desolation in Elona, we can see the Lonely Vigil statue, and we see a map called the Crystal Overlook, which suggests that we're near the Crystal Desert, but you never really get to make that proper connection. The closest you get is that there is a quest you can complete. I think it was locked behind a quest. You can go through a teleporter, a forgotten teleporter, which warps you from the most northern regions of the Nightfall campaign with its world map. It warps you to the most southern reaches of the Prophecies campaign with its world map to the Crystal Desert. You never get to see a proper connection. You never get to walk properly. You never even get to see on a map a connection. And that's kind of it. You know that in the lore it works, but that's it. In Guild Wars 2 here, now in 2017, a decade after Nightfall came out, we actually get to experience walking this like stretch of land, this imaginary, theoretical stretch of land, if you will, that now is visible on the world map and stuff. And that was really funny. It was really weird in one play session with me sat here in this chair to go from the Lonely Vigil statue south and then down into Desolation regions, and then start hearing about Nightfall stuff like the Vengeance Mines, and going off, and eventually even reaching the borders of Vabi. Like, that was such a weird, in a good way, it was a very odd experience to have, and it was something that I know a part of me as a GW1 nerd has been craving for years, and well, here I got it.
We're spread too thin. Zula's up north, Issa's running around with ghosts, Keto's out doing God's only know what. We should be focusing all our efforts on the Mouth of Torment.
Look, I hear you, but we're not making any progress. We should be trying to find allies. The Order of Shadows can't win this fight.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about the Desolation. One thing I haven't mentioned, if you're thinking that I'm done with the Elon Riverlands here, there are actually lore books to get on each map. I haven't mentioned this, and it's something I've wanted for the game for a long time. I want it as a proper map completion thing, to wander around picking up lore, and you got to get it in the same way that you'd have to get points of interest and stuff, and in the end you'd get a book out of it. I've always loved that idea. The devs are actually doing that in Path of Fire. Each map has hidden in nooks and crannies pages of a lore book, which once you've got them all, you can then read the lore afterwards, which is a great way to do it as well. You remember in Season 3 they were doing similar things, but you'd get the fragments as they came, and you'd get them out of order, and it'd be a bit weird. I like the way they've done it here. I've not found any of those books. I've not completed any of them yet, so there's still lots for me to find in the Elon Riverlands, among other stuff. But the Desolation has those too. The Desolation also has an additional one where you find all these statues of the gods, and you got to pray to them, and there's actually loads of them. There's Cormyr's statue, there's an Abaddon statue. The achievement UI suggests that they were looking for a Doom statue as well, but I guess they've never built one, as an asset, so there's not one on the map. And yeah, there's a lot to do, basically. In terms of how it looks and feels, I've been blown away. It is the most faithful recreation of a Guild Wars 1 location in Guild Wars 2 I've ever had in terms of environment design. So we've always known that you can visit old places in this game that existed in the first, and they'd be twisted and they'd be a bit different. So you get to go back to, Old Lion's Arch, and it's flooded now. You get to go to Droknar's Forge, and it's flooded now. You get to go to some places that feel very similar, like Yak's Bend in Frostgorge Sound. You can see the layout of the land is very similar, but all the, the structures and the buildings have moved. The Desolation, I swear to God, guys, I had multiple moments where I was like, wow, I feel like I'm in Guild Wars 1 right now. I just feel like I'm in a really beautiful, high-graphic version of Guild Wars 1 with totally different gameplay. I feel like I'm in this area. I recognize this area so well. And I think what it comes down to, largely, is the sulfur, the sulfurous waste, the alkali pan, all these places, all the region names here are just exactly the same as old explorable maps, basically. And it adds so much, and you get to really reconcile the difference between these two places. I very much regret leading into Path of Fire that I never did you all a video series showing off these GW1 locations so you can have these experiences as I have been. I may even go back and do it anyway because it is that fun. And yeah, just visually it feels so similar. Swimming through these trenches on a skimmer feels so similar to riding through on a Janundu. And of course it's just extra beautiful now. There's a lot to talk about in this map. I will do a lot more of that tomorrow when I understand it better. There's an enormous number of POIs on this one. It's a big place. I think there's 60 points of interest, which is way more than there's been before. So there's lots to look at. I did a mastery where I get a sulfur flamethrower and charge around blowing up Forged. I've noticed a new type of dynamic event that they've got now, which are essentially escort events, but you have to use special action hotkeys to tell the NPCs to come to your location directly, instead of them just walking on a rail. So if you guys have played Wing 3 of the raids, where you have to, in the first encounter, use a special action hotkey to get Glenna to run over to you, they're doing that in events. And so there's a few different versions of this. There's one as well where you capture Awakened and tame them in order for them to become allies to fight against the Forged. And this was a really hard event. Again, I don't know whether it's just because my build's bad and I'm not playing very well, but it came down to the wire, and a random player charged in out of nowhere on a raptor and blew up a wave of attacking Forged at the last moment, saving the day, which was a great experience. And yeah, so I've mostly been exploring the map. We'll get more into that. The last thing I will say that I did on day 4 is I got the final mount. This was the Jackal, and what they did with this is ridiculous. It is so cool in lore. I wasn't even that excited about the Jackal, honestly. Lots of people are like, oh, I'm excited to ride around on some kind of canine. I wasn't even that excited about the Jackal. I was excited about the skimmer, and I finally get a lot of skimmer gameplay now because of all the sulfurous waste and hates and stuff. But the Jackal, the area you get the Jackal is a floating temple above the alkali pan, built by the Jinn. There's all this amazing lore about the Marganites and how they've been created. It is fantastic. It is so good that it's inspired me to make a short little series of videos, which I'm going to get on in just a second, where I show off the acquisition of each mount and what's going on with them and where they're good for and how they work. Because this Jackal is just this fun. I cannot in any way express to you how amazing this area is of the game in just a small segment of a VOD video like this. I want to dedicate and have a look at it. So keep an eye out on that, guys. The Jackal is so badass. It's like going to the air realm in Azuric or something. What an experience. And so far that's probably been my favorite place of everything you've heard me talk about these past 4 days. Go get the Jackal. Go to that area. It is absolutely fantastic. And so yeah, there you go, guys. Generally all looking still pretty up. My main disappointment is that the story seems to have petered out a bit on this map, but there is a lot of open world stuff to do. I don't know. I'll have to don't take any of my opinions as concrete right now. I'm a very slow person to develop my opinions, and I want to be quite reasoned by the time I get to them. This is no kind of review of Path of Fire. These are just initial takeaways. And yeah, I'd love to hear about your experiences getting here, guys. Have I overtaken some of you? Do some of you think I'm way behind at this point? We'll have to see. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back for another one of these tomorrow, as well as hopefully some fun little mount videos, even if they're only fun for me to show off, and not many people are going to want to watch them, because, hey, we all know about the mounts by now. The Griffin is next, I guess. I will see you guys very shortly.